The Hegelian dialectic presents to us an opportunity to mesh two opposing polarities in order to create an absolute result. By coalescing a thesis with its antithesis, we come upon a synthesis, which we then bifurcate with its own antithesis in a perpetual amalgamation that rationalizes illogicalities and inches us closer to the eternal truth. Make sense? Well, I am autistic, so maybe I'm just not reading the room very well right now. I can geek out pretty hard. Let me rephrase. George Hegel was a German philosopher from the 18th century. His prime philosophy focused on contradictions and how, when we converge them with one another, things actually tend to make a bit more sense. In a sense, you can't have joy without pain, or birth without death. Well, what if you can't have awareness without there first being ignorance? What if? My life, just like yours, has been and still is full of contradictions. Now, I mentioned I have autism, and not too long ago, I was that stereotypical autistic kid in the corner of the classroom with his hood on, sucking his thumb, not making any eye contact or even talking. I was that 11-year-old boy who was struggling so much with severe OCD that I was hospitalized for 5.5 weeks in a lockdown psychiatric ward. I was that little boy who would cry and shut down and break down the minute I wasn't by my mom's side due to severe anxiety. And I was that student who had to drop out of public school in the 5th grade due to my struggles, and ultimately became a social recluse for nearly 15 years. But because what I appeared to be wasn't necessarily all that I was, I have now published books of poetry, I've spoken in front of audiences from Helsinki to Dubai, and who is more at peace on stage with the spotlight on than anywhere else. How did I go from the back of the room to the front of the room? How did I go from being impatient to presenting alongside doctors from Stanford to Cambridge to King's College London? How did I go from dropping out of the public school system to now educating school systems on inclusive practices? My life is a living contradiction. How did this happen, right? How did I go from all that has been to what is now? Well, let's consider this. What if being aware of what we do not know is the first step we take on the path to what's possible? Was Hegel onto something? Could it actually be wise to not know? To become more aware due to our ignorance? What others thought I was and what I thought I was wasn't all that I was. So what if those who think they know don't know, and those who know that they don't know actually know? Could this be the difference between ignorance and arrogance? Arrogance, the word itself, has a core Latin meaning of to presume, and arrogance can hinder personal growth due to its effect of closing the lid of the mind. This can result in the creation of stigmas, stereotypes, and biases. But ignorance? Well, I am ignorant. You are ignorant. We are all ignorant to some extent. Nobody knows everything. But what if we were aware of this ignorance? When we become aware of our ignorance, we free up space in our mind to learn. And when we can be aware of our ignorance, we know that there's much more to learn. Hegel's logic deems self-contradiction legitimate and necessary. Awareness may very well stem from being ignorant, just as the sun cannot rise without having first disappeared in the sky the night before. So what if we all knew that we didn't know, and we're aware that even though we know that we don't know, we'll never know what we don't know until we know. But I'm getting into the weeds here. I have a tendency to do that as my medical cannabis card grants me access to various types of weed. High-functioning autistic, more like high and functioning autistic. Now, it's true, I have autism, and unless you know me on a personal level, you would never be able to tell. That is, most are ignorant of this fact. You see, I may be presenting now, but my autism isn't, and this is most often the case. A subtle encapsulation of everyday dualities. But you didn't see the meltdown I had yesterday due to sensory overload. You didn't hear me cry myself to sleep last week. I liken my life to a play. I show up and perform quite well, but very few see the literal blood, sweat, and tears that go on behind the scenes and the endless hours of preparation for real-world encounters. Now, I just told you all something that you did not know, and ignorance in this regard is a fact of life. I am ignorant of all of your life journeys. But again, if we can be aware of our ignorance, we free up space in our mind to learn about each other, our experiences, our challenges, our successes, which we can then contrast with our own lived experience in order to develop a broader perspective on what the human condition may consist of. In the 1970s, two Israeli psychologists coined what is known as the representative bias, by which we form unconscious concepts due simply to how an event or an object in front of us has been represented in the past. This is why so many people are surprised when they find out I have autism. They're comparing me to how autism has been represented to them previously. As David Dunning, in an article titled, "We Are All Confident Idiots," David Dunning, Cornell professor, said, "An ignorant mind is not empty, but one that's filled with the clutter of irrelevant or misleading life experiences, theories, intuitions, and hunches that regrettably have the look and feel of useful and accurate knowledge. Incompetence does not leave people disoriented or perplexed. Instead, the incompetent are often blessed with an inappropriate confidence, buoyed by something that feels to them like knowledge." So ignorance, in this sense, can truly be bliss. For a full mind is a closed mind, a satisfied mind. But an empty mind is a hungry mind that yearns to learn that which it does not yet know. The Buddhist monk, Shunryu Suzuki, a wise man, he once said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few." So where does all of this leave us? Well, drawing again on my own life journey, I was that isolated recluse who sucked his thumb until the age of 14, developing a severe, unintelligible speech impediment in turn. I have very minimal formal education past the 5th grade. I was that grown man who had never before been completely independent until I moved to LA last year at age 30, 10 months ago, without barely knowing a soul. Where I've been and where I am on face value might seem like they contradict one another. But what if we left our presumptions or arrogance behind and replaced it with awareness of our ignorance? Would we then be able to zoom out and realize that they're all interrelated and connected? After all, a coin has two sides, and there is a reason these two sides, the heads and the tail, are in direct contrast with one another, for it is only when you put them together that they form the whole coin. Now, awareness is uncomfortable. Awareness can be very uncomfortable, simply due to certain variables appearing throughout life that we were previously oblivious to. And in this sense, we tend to have a natural inclination to stay in the dark about many things, especially as it pertains to ourselves. For being aware of all that we are tends to burn the edges of our soul, a sort of existential discomfort whose refuge from we can only find in that dark cave of ignorance, where we know that we can't see, but know not what we don't see. By not knowing, we are now available to know. This is a gift, albeit a difficult one to unwrap at times, especially when in the midst of that dark cave of ignorance. But what if? What if? Instead of being hindered by this darkness, we use it as a roadmap to guide us toward the light and thus out of the cave? What if? What if we as humans utilized our unique one-of-a-kind ability to transcend ignorance into an awareness where we learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and with this discover the path out of the cave to what is possible? I ask, what if? To quote Carl Jung, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is our Hegelian dialectic for the day. So in the end, ignorance may indeed very well be bliss. This saying actually stems from the closing lines of a 1742 poem by Thomas Gray. Where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. But if we can merge ignorance with awareness and bliss with discomfort, a certain rapture of harmony is produced. A personal equilibrium that transmutes our ignorance into an awareness of both sides of the coin, and this to a life well lived. A life that has the privilege to experience all aspects of the human condition, a most fulfilling life that we come to know due to the fact that we are aware that we do not know. And this is the idea that is embedded within each and every one of us, only to be discovered when we realize that through the discomfort of our souls being cast aflame by that awareness, we don't need to go looking for the light, for it is already within us, and it is in the darkest of caves that this light of ours can shine the brightest. I am Russell Lehmann, a walking contradiction. Some know me as the autistic poet. I like to think of myself as the artistic poet. And here is one, a poem. We live in the dark, Plato's cave. Afraid of the light, only the brave. Turn towards the fire to see that it's made a world of shadows we mistake for the ways of the world. What world? I know of no such thing, aside from a perception that resides in my being. It's as if I look without really seeing, as if I talk without ever speaking. But if I listen to my heart, and not just listen, but hear, I uncover the contrast of courage with fear. And with this, discover the one true absolute that exists, the precious gift of polarities forming a synthesis. Thank you. Thank you.